Hi, everyone. I'm Janelle Nanos. I'm a reporter with the Boston Globe. I'm moderating this afternoon's panel on influencing consumer behavior. And I have a lovely selection of panelists here with me today. I'm going to actually let them introduce themselves because I love to hear them talk about their research. But I'll just do a quick introduction of myself. I cover retail and consumer culture at the Globe, which means basically if you can buy it, I can write about it. And that means I also cover a lot about the food industry, about the grocery industry, about restaurants, about food delivery, about Instacart, restaurant delivery, and almost always at the end of those stories, I end up thinking a lot about waste. And so this has been a subject I've been passionate about for a long time. I feel like I'm in a room full of people who really, really care and know a lot about this issue. So I'm hoping to get as much from your questions and insights as I get from the panel here. We're just really hoping to have a conversation. So please feel free to raise your hand at any point in the course of the conversation to add your thoughts or share. I'm excited that everyone's here. So thank you. JoAnne, do you want to just maybe take a second to introduce each of yourselves and where you're from? And then there's a couple of PowerPoints just to sort of set the scene a little bit, and then we can just kind of jump into the discussion itself. So thank you.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Are we on? Okay. So I'm JoAnne Berkenkamp. I am a senior advocate with the Natural Resources Defense Council. Dana Gunders is the person who founded our work back in 2012. You heard from her this morning. And our program has continued to grow and diversify over the last, 6 years. So I'm joined actually here at the conference by two colleagues, Elizabeth Balkin, who just recently joined our team as our director, and then also my colleague Andrea Spate, who's here as well. So please say hello to them. So NRDC does a lot of different work in food waste. The Save the Food campaign, which is what I'll talk with you about today, is one of them. And I'm going to leave it there, but just say that I'm thrilled to be in conversation with everybody. I find this conference to be so energizing. It's, I think, close to double the size that it was last year, which is just fabulous. And I think it's a sign of the energy and commitment around this issue. So I look forward to talking with you more later in the session.
Hi, everybody. My name is Laura Moreno, and I'm a PhD student at UC Berkeley, focusing on household-level food waste, and with a specific focus on behavior and measurement. So really trying to get at the what is being wasted, why it's being wasted, where it's going, all of those different things through the lenses of sociology, urban planning, and nutrition. And I'll be talking a little bit about my research later.
Hello, I'm John Deutsch. I'm a professor of culinary arts and food science at Drexel University in Philadelphia. My area of research is food product development, and we have something called the Drexel Food Lab, which is a good food product development lab. We do work in health promotion, accessible food, and sustainable food. So really anything that is good as broadly defined. And a lot of our work in this that really cuts across all three of those categories is repurposing surplus food, co-streams, food that would otherwise be wasted. A lot of our clients and collaborators are in the room, which is great.
Thank you. So just to get things started, I wanted to do a little bit of a quick survey of sorts. I know we're in the company that we're in, so these results might be skewed somewhat, but if we could, just by either, a quick yelling out, what are the foods that you waste the most? What are the things that spoil in your refrigerator the most? And no one's going to rat each other out here, but what are the things that you feel guiltiest about, maybe? Greens? Okay, sorry, I'm getting greens, I'm getting produce, anything else? Herbs, okay, yeah. What's it? Avocados, bananas, yeah, guilty as charged. How many people here compost? Everyone, yeah. How many people feel a little bit better about themselves by virtue of having composted? Okay. Which you should, right? How many people end up, even though you're supposed to not buy more than you need, doing that every week anyway? Yeah. Okay. we're all guilty of it, and we're the people, we're the smartest people about this, right? Or not me, but you guys are at least. So yeah, I mean, here we are, we're talking about consumer behavior, and we know we're guilty of it too. So I think, if we're the most enlightened people in the room, how do we get people who are not thinking about this stuff every day to really change their habits? And I think that's the goal we're hoping to take away from this conversation, which is to make people feel like it's not a difficult thing to do, right? And so JoAnne is going to talk through a little bit of the work that she's been doing with NRDC to really kind of create this public campaign and to make something that, is maybe very obvious to us here in the room, but may not be very obvious to the public at large, and to sort of, to hopefully dig in a little bit about what the findings have been since that campaign launched. So, thank you.
Okay,
Yeah.
super. So I'm going to talk with you a little bit about the Save the Food campaign. I hope many of you picked up a tote bag today. If you haven't yet, there are more available down there. But Save the Food has really been an effort that NRDC has embarked upon in conjunction with the Ad Council, which is the nonprofit arm of the U.S. advertising industry, to get at this challenge that somewhere around 40% of the waste that's generated is generated in our homes, right? That's what the Refed Roadmap showed us several years ago. And we had actually embarked on this campaign before that, knowing that this issue of household waste is really critical, and we need to engage consumers if we're going to crack this. So recognizing that, we've been working with the Ad Council on this campaign for several years, and it really responds to, again, one of the findings from Refed, and I know this is very small, but it actually shows the very top line where they looked at the cost-benefit of different strategies for dealing with wasted food. That consumer education is one of the most cost-effective and scalable of the solutions that they looked at, as it will directly influence purchasing and eating behaviors. And so the intention for us with the campaign was not only to engage consumers in wasting less at home, but also to help change some of the social license for businesses that can drive waste, right? Whether it's having all those rotisserie chickens available at 5 minutes to 8 before the grocery store closes, or other things like that, right? To help engage consumers in letting businesses know that it's okay if they shift some of those practices and reduce waste in those business environments as well. So as we designed this campaign, which we started back in 2015, really in the development process, we did a lot of research through the Ad Council into trying to understand what drives waste at home. Why is this happening? What's going to waste? What's the psychology that we need to grapple with in this campaign? And we found some really interesting things. We found that so much of the waste that was happening at home was in fact driven by people's really good intentions. People don't set out to waste food, they don't set out to waste money, and yet, like all of us responded when it's like, what do you waste most commonly, right? There's something out there. And so what we found is that many of our intentions and aspirations to be good caretakers, to be good hosts, to serve everyone in our family, those sorts of things drive waste. So it's things like, people buying the extra gigantic size of spinach, right? Self-improvement, right? We know we should eat healthy, we want that produce, but sometimes we just can't get through it fast enough. People don't like empty refrigerators. People don't like empty shopping carts, so that desire for sort of comfort and security can drive the desire to purchase too much or to have our fridges too full. And also things like thoughtfulness. You don't want to run out when you have guests. You might have kids with food allergies or complicated schedules. All of those good intentions drive waste. And we also know that, blame is a bad motivator, right? So we needed a way to engage consumers in a way that was positive and that empowered them to take action. So the Save the Food campaign is really focused on raising awareness of the size of the issue, and you'll see some of the advertising. It shows things like 40% of food in America is wasted, to raise awareness of the challenge, and to give people then very practical tools to take action, right? We're focused on moms because they're typically the gatekeepers for food into the home, and millennials is the second target audience because we felt they would be most receptive to the audience, to the message, and that actually has proven to be true. So you can see a little bit of the look of the campaign. We're engaging people on things like smarter meal planning, proper food storage. We found a lot of confusion about how to properly store food. Innovative recipes to use things up that typically go to waste. And then things like apps and other tools, right, to help people shop properly, save food, know what's in their fridge, that kind of thing. So you can see here some of the multiplicity of outreach tools that we have. So everything from TV, and many of you have seen the strawberry video. Yeah, so that's been on TV, it's been online in a lot of settings. I think at least 12 million people have viewed that. Print and outdoor ads. There's this series that's focused on best if used, as in best if used by, best if used ever. That's gotten a lot of currency around the country, radio, mobile banners, and that sort of thing. A whole series of partnerships. Transit ads. This is actually a sign of a kiosk in San Francisco near our office. So we've had a lot of really wonderful partnerships in the media community as well to help get the word out. So in terms of results, as of the first quarter of 2018, as part of the regular national survey work that the Ad Council does on their campaigns, they've determined that 37% of moms are actually aware of our campaign. 50% of millennials are aware of our campaign. So we are thrilled about these numbers. That's significantly higher than a lot of Ad Council campaigns achieve. So half of millennials, that's a bunch. So we've done things like introduced a skill on Alexa, so you can ask Alexa how to store your asparagus. Close to 500,000 people have used it. We've achieved about $76 million of donated media value. So when we put up billboards, our partners, for instance, will just pay for the printing. You can print a billboard for about $200. But depending upon where it is, for instance, with some of the billboards that NRDC has actually paid for ourselves, it costs, for instance, depending upon where you are, like $50,000 to have a billboard up for a month. Through the Ad Council, we're able to pay for the printing, the $200, and then we get the billboards for free. And so it has allowed this really quite astonishing leveraging of those pretty minor investments, now up to $76 million in donated media value. And we've done a lot of work with cities, with counties, with some states, with a number of businesses. And I think the feeling is that those, particularly government jurisdictions, would not ever have the capacity to design or implement or do this kind of advertising on their own. And so it's really leveraged their capacity as well. And we're up to about 1.8 billion media impressions in the United States, which is like every person in the country seeing the campaign 5 times. So we're happy to see that growth. I just want to share with you before I break and turn it over to Laura, I believe, some of the results that we're seeing. So these charts compare people who are not aware of the campaign with people who are aware of the campaign, right? So 78% of the people who are aware of the campaign agree that my individual actions can make a difference reducing food waste. And that's of the entire US population, a representative sample of the US population. About 65% of the general population that's not aware of the campaign thinks they can make a difference. You can see here on the right, about double the number of people who are aware of the campaign have used some kind of an app, like they're taking that kind of an action to improve their waste management, food management at home. 78% of the people who are aware of the campaign say that they have reduced waste in the last year. So people say things sometimes that they don't do, right? So it's important to acknowledge that. But you can see that it's substantially higher than the people who are not aware of the campaign. And then we particularly have seen this bounce with people who are talking to friends and family about food waste reduction. The folks that are aware of the campaign, 64% of them say that they have been in conversation with people, relative to 28% of the people who are not aware of the campaign. So I think it tells you the campaign is helping to spur conversation and dialogue. And that's a good sign, right? That's where we're starting. Like, we need people to engage and pay attention and be aware and start engaging with others. So I'm not going to show this now because we're short on time, but we did put out a video with, the Peter Rabbit film. So there was a feature film on Peter Rabbit that was released in February. And the British comedian James Corden was the voice of Peter, which is pretty cool. And he did a 35-second video for us. And it's all about these little rabbits valuing their food, which is like super cool. Right, so we can show that at the end if we've got time. But I'm going to stop there and turn it over to Laura.
Great, thank you, Laura.
Hello, everybody. So I'm going to give you a little background on my research, but I'm not going to delve too much into it because I actually want to ask you guys some questions at some point, and then just give you an idea of sort of 3 of the foundational sort of concepts around household food waste behavior that I found in my research. So basically, my research is based on a couple of methods. I'm really trying to look at measurement and behavior in households in the US related to food waste. And I go into people's homes, I sit with them for an hour to an hour and a half often, talk to them about food, talk to them about waste, talk to them about a lot of things, which gives me some really robust and rich data on sort of these complex and diverse relationships that people have with food and people have with their waste. Additionally, I had the great opportunity of working with the NRDC on some of their direct measurement work, digging through trash, which I'm sure a lot of you in this room love to do, or you wouldn't be here.
She's really good at it.
I do
the
love
trash
it.
digger, she's the one.
I'm a maggot lover, so that often distinguishes the people who really love to dig through trash. You can tell a lot from them and how big they are, and they're kind of cute. If anybody wants to see a video, I have one on my computer after, so little squiggles.
Bunnies and maggots.
So I really get to do a lot of the fun things. We also do surveys. I really enjoy it. But one of the things that's really the foundation of my work is that I see wasting food in households as a social phenomenon. It's often framed as an individual issue of excess, restraint, maybe people being lazy or careless. And sort of my idea is, actually no, sort of in our social system currently around the world, wasting food is kind of inevitable. I mean, I think about wasting food constantly, and I will not pretend like I don't waste, in my mind, a significant amount of food for various reasons. And so I think that's really important to not really see the individual as this person who's making wrong decisions, but look in the entire food system. What perceived choices do they have? How does our society limit the perceptions of their choices that they have? An example I wanted to sort of show of this, of the larger social issue in our relationship with food, is related to how food looks. So I'm gonna ask you guys questions, and please be honest, no judgment. Remember, we all waste food, Janelle told us. So I'm gonna give you two options. So imagine you guys are going to the grocery store, you're picking up some fruits and vegetables, think maybe an apple, pick your favorite. So I'm gonna give you two options. One, do you prefer to have a perfect looking, sort of beautiful fruit and vegetable? Or how many people like it to maybe look a little weird, asymmetrical, blemishes? An apple might not have dirt on it, but maybe a carrot would. So how many people would prefer the perfect looking fruits and vegetables? A lot of you, right? Okay, how many people, the sort of more imperfect, the ugly that we call them, whatever, aesthetically challenged? Great. So I looked at this, and by talking to people in households, I asked them why. You delve deeper, they actually were saying the exact same reasons about why they preferred the different types. It was, they were using what food looked like as a proxy for how it would taste, how healthy it was for them and their loved ones, and how safe it was to eat. And one person, even with the carrots and the roots in the bottom, carrots in the grocery store don't have the little end root, but when you have it in your yard, it does. One woman even asked me, is that safe to eat? I don't know. Is that, and some of us may chuckle, that's just part of the carrot. But for her, she was really concerned and didn't want to feed her children the sort of dangly root on a carrot. And so I think that's really important to think about. We're thinking that people don't like ugly fruits. We have to understand, or prefer perfect looking things. We need to understand why. So the second thing I want to highlight is that sometimes we may promote behaviors related to wasted food, and they may have sort of perverse or unintended consequences. And I think the idea, sort of, Janelle mentioned, how many people feel less guilty about composting food. It's actually been shown in my research that people actually say statements like, yeah, I went to the store, I got 3 cucumbers, I know I only needed 1, but that's how it was packaged, but it's okay, I can compost them. I'll wait till they get flaccid in the refrigerator, and then I'll put them in the compost, and that's fine. And those are real quotes, and that's not just one person saying that, that's actually something that comes over repeatedly. Again, leftovers is another one. How many of you have gone to a restaurant, had leftovers, asked for a to-go box, sort of knowing, yeah, I'm not gonna eat that? Me? I'm the only one? Yeah, right, guys. And so it's this guilt alleviation. You put it in the refrigerator takes on the responsibility. 2 weeks later, I open it, it's moldy, I was gonna eat it. Those nachos, I had that on my mind. I was totally gonna eat them. And so there may be things similar in planning, for instance. We promote meal planning, we promote shopping lists. We say over-purchasing is the problem, let's plan better. But planning doesn't work for every household. It's actually been shown that these aspirational relationships planning can reduce food waste, but it can also cause somebody to plan the whole week, buy all that food, and then their lifestyle, they're just not able to achieve that plan. So I think this is where we need to think, who are the people that could be the rigid planners? Come up with tools for people who need more flexible planners. You know, we need to not just have a one-size-fits-all, because there may be some perverse consequences. And then the last thing I want to mention is one of my favorites. And actually, Dani, who's in the audience and who she works with, Brian Rowe, have talked about this as perceived benefits of wasting food, or another researcher, Elizabeth Shove, calls it cultural services. But it's the idea that we often see wasting food as wasteful. That's why we call it waste. Waste, you know, environmental resources, money. Why are people doing this? But people see value in wasting food. For instance, the good provider identity, which JoAnne sort of talked about, this idea of wanting to provide for your children, your loved ones, healthy food. People talk about it being, it's worth it to them to waste food just to have the opportunity for their children to have access to the healthy fruits and vegetables. For them, it's a trade-off. And I'm not saying it's good to waste food. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying we need to understand the value that people might actually get from discarding food in order to best do interventions. Because if somebody's seeing that, oh, for me, reducing my wasted food, I'm not going to be able to provide as much healthy food to my children, they're probably going to make the choice to feed their children healthier food. And so I think those are the sorts of things, the complexity, the diversity of consumer behavior that we really all need to understand as we move forward. And I'm sure a lot of you in this room are doing a lot of work on it, so I look forward to chatting with you guys in the future. Thank you.
So organized. This is Ivy League level. I want to say there are no uneaten nachos in my life. I'm very proud of that. Do I need the mic? I'm a classroom educator. So this is more for me than for you. Okay, so I looked at my presentation from last year. This is what I ended with, or 2 years ago. This is a prototype of, I mentioned I do value-added products, food manufacturing, product development from surplus foods. And I think this is really important work for a variety of reasons that I'll tell you. And I think there are two Achilles heels to this. The first one is food safety. So when I was in culinary school, the mantra was, when in doubt, throw it out, right? Expiration dates, a little mold, a little wrinkly. Last thing you want to do is make someone sick. You could lose your business. You could go to jail if you're negligent, right? Serious business for a chef. We've gotten past that, but I think it's going to take one case. Look, we're all back on romaine, right? What was that? We forget romaine. Oh, we're cool with that, right? But one food waste product killing someone or making them sick, and all of this goes away in my mind, right? Food waste stops becoming the number one, concern, and we start saying it's not that important. The other Achilles heel, I think, for the other leg, is equity, right? The story of food waste cannot be taking rich people's trash and giving it to poor people so that everyone has enough, right? We know that, but sometimes we forget that in talking about recovery and distribution and making sure everyone has enough. So we developed this prototype with Phil Abundance. They talked this morning about where this brand has evolved. And it was called Rescued Relish. And the idea was it's a mixed vegetable pickle that could sell for a premium for both those reasons, right? We have to make food made from surplus desirable, sexy. We want to get that Whole Food shopper paying $7 or $8 in this case for a jar of relish or chow chow, and be able to feed someone affordably, right, accessibly. So this brand has evolved into something that Kate Boulder presented this morning called Abundantly Good. And if you look at the tagline for Abundantly Good, it's upcycle and uplift. And that's not coincidental. So I want to talk today about two research projects, sort of storytelling about our work with consumers. Because to me, the fact that 2 years ago I was touting the fact that we can develop safe, affordable, marketable products. Tom O'Donnell, who's in the room, worked with us to figure out sort of the business case for this. We published on that. We can do this. But there's a sort of elephant in the room when you're talking about we can make something safe and delicious and affordable, which is what? I know I can make this, and it's not going to kill you, and it's going to be delicious, but
How do
do
I
you
get
want
people
it?
to buy
Do you
yeah.
buy it, right? And it's a different type of consumer research. I guarantee I could give you all a little cup of this, and I could say 95% of the people I tested this with thought it was delicious and said they would buy it, right? And as people who do food manufacturing know, that's a very different thing from saying, okay, you're spending $100 a week on food, and 7 of them have to be for this rescued relish, right? So you'll see some sort of cross-cutting themes here. So one of the things we've been working on, we have a grant, thanks to the Clinell Foundation, for a surplus food R&D center, where we provide technical assistance to manufacturers, some of whom are in this room, with whatever they need. There are enough hurdles to start a food business. Starting a food business from surplus food is extra challenging, so we want to step in. And as we started this project, we thought a lot of our requests would be around, food safety, sourcing, technical issues, and some of them are. But the one we keep hearing more and more about and keep coming back to is the marketing, the branding, the consumer, the sensory. How do you actually sell this stuff? I can make it. I can make a ton of it. There's no shortage of spent grain or ugly vegetables or any number of things on the market. Okara, as everyone switches to plant-based milks, right? But how do you use juice pulp, right? How do you actually sell this stuff? So we did a couple studies. This one is in the Journal of Consumer Behavior. It's not free, but if you email me, I will violate all sorts of copyright laws. So we did large surveys with U.S. consumers through MTurks. I'm not going to bore you with the research details. You can read about them if you want to be bored. But I will tell you what we did. One of the huge findings for us, and that we've heard from manufacturers, is that the language around this stuff matters. We started with something called rescued relish. We thought that was really cool. Then we asked people what they thought of the term rescued, and they said, that's stupid. We won't buy it because it's called rescued. Then we said, well, would you buy it if it was called upcycled relish? And they said, absolutely, where can I get it? How much can I pay? And here's my wallet, right? So the language really matters. So upcycled, something I cannot explain, a statistical anomaly, is that people hate the term processed, but they love reprocessed. Which just goes to show you how frustrating consumer research is. But upcycled is the big winner. The other thing we did was we defined upcycled, and we said, here are 3 types of food. Here's conventional food, here's upcycled food made from surplus, and here's organic food. And we defined them all, similar length definitions and so on. We said, just here's a product, here's a granola bar, here's a tomato sauce, whatever. Would you buy it? What's your likelihood to buy and what's your likelihood to pay? If it's conventional, organic, or upcycled. And what we found is that upcycled, not using the term upcycled, we used the term value-added surplus products, is it's upcycled is too leading, it's sexy, right? Conventional is not sexy. It's a distinct category. People think of it differently, the way they think of it, the way they think of organic differently. And what's interesting from a marketing perspective is they think of it more like organic than conventional. And that's a really important finding as well, because when we started this, there were kind of 2 sort of fears or assumptions from the big food industry, multinationals, CPG, consumer packaged good manufacturers. who we talked to. One was the sort of pink slime story, right? Do you remember the pink slime story? It's actually a super food waste friendly, sustainable product, right? There's meat left on the bones if you eat meat. Right? There's meat left on the bones after butchery. You can throw those bones out with that delicious and nutritious meat on it, or you can take it off the bones and make something else with it, like a chicken nugget, right? I think everyone in this room would agree it's better to take it off the bones and use it rather than throw it out. But visually, it looks kind of gross, and the industry wasn't transparent, and they use ammonia, and there's, for all sorts of reasons, it became a huge scandal, and it put people out of business, right? So the first fear is, if people find out we're feeding them waste, they will freak out and it will destroy us, right? So even if I'm trying not to use any company names, let's say I make soup, I don't want to make soup from scraps, I want to make soup from Beautiful, because if someone finds out I'm selling soup from scraps, it's going to destroy my Beautiful soup business, which they destroyed on their own. So that's one fear. The other fear is that if they find out about the scrap soup, they're going to want a discount, right? So we did some testing. Again, I won't bore you with the details. But you could just look at it visually. The blue is the upcycled. The red is the conventional. The dotted line is pre-intervention. The solid line is post-intervention. We showed them products, and then we showed them 3 different videos. One was a rational video about the problem of food waste, and we used an excerpt from Refit. What is the problem of food waste? One was a tug at the heartstrings emotional video. Guess what we used? Strawberry.
Did you hear it?
Every time. And then the third was a
up
neutral
music, I
video
swear.
about garlic farming, just to like be random and neutral. And what we found is that with intervention, and interestingly, the emotional did not work as well as the rational, which should give you some faith in consumers, right? Once they learned a little bit about food waste, they're likely, so on the y-axis is likelihood to buy, and the x-axis are increasing price points. From like, so this one is what, pasta sauce? So first level would be like 75 cents would you buy it, right? Second level would be like $1.50. Fifth level would be like $6, right? So we expect to see this curve, but what we want to see is a shift to the right after the intervention, which we're seeing with the upcycle. And appropriately, same thing for granola bars. And the opposite effect for chicken nuggets, which is what you want, which is what we want to see, right? Because that means they're not just saying, yes, 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 I'll buy more because of the intervention. They're actually thinking like, no, I don't want upcycled leftover chicken nuggets. I feel good about buying the granola bar or the pasta sauce. I think I'm out of time, right?
We can talk. I was going to ask you about seafood, so I think
All right,
we can,
I'll
we
do
can
a
definitely do that.
really quick seafood. So some of our other research is about seafood. Most, again, sort of consumers are mind-boggling. I'll just show you this little illustration. So this is from the same store. It's a ShopRite in Philadelphia. On the left, you have a 2-pound bag of tilapia fillet for $6.98. On the right, you have fresh tilapia, which is defrosted from the same manufacturer, for $6.99 for 1 pound. Guess which people prefer? The fresh, which is defrosted, sits under the lights all day, gets nasty, people ask to smell it, and then they put it back because it doesn't smell like they want it to, right? And at the end of the day, a lot of people think this goes into cooked stuff and fish cakes and stuff like that. It's thrown away based on labor, and also based on the fact that it's sitting out all day. So you don't want your fish cakes made with the stuff that's sitting out. So we have a cook, we're working with World Wildlife Fund, we have a Cook from Frozen campaign to see if consumers would shift their behavior with a little bit of education around this. And we could talk about it later, but basically they perceive frozen fish as less fresh and less high quality than fresh fish. Once they learn that first of all, it's the same thing, it's just defrosted in most cases. And once they learn that you can actually cook it from frozen, the same way you cook a frozen hamburger patty, you don't have to defrost it under running water or in the fridge overnight, which is what every package of frozen fish in the universe says on the back of it, which makes me crazy. They'll actually start cooking it more and cooking it from frozen and so on. So that's the kind of work we're doing. I'll just end with kind of where we are with things. So I mentioned the Surplus Food R&D Center. So we're helping manufacturers. We don't make anything, but we help other people do their job better. And that could be nonprofit, it could be private business. We're working, thanks to Rockefeller Foundation, with the James Beard Foundation to help other culinary schools kind of use this model in their training. And then we have a grad program to try and get the next generation of professionals sort of thinking along these lines. So I will stop there. Thank you.
All right, well, you guys make my job easy here. So I wanted to just, since you guys all just presented some of the work that you've been doing, I'd love to just hear a little bit more about, you know, the steps you've taken or the lessons that you've taken from that research and where you're actually applying it. You just sort of mentioned a little bit of that, Jonathan, but you know, JoAnne, if you could perhaps start just, you know, from the public awareness campaign and work with the Ad Council, what are some of the takeaways that you guys have already had from that campaign, and how have they been applied to out in, you know, the public space in various forums at this point? Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, I appreciated your point, Jonathan, about does the emotional work or does the rational work?
That was not a criticism of
No,
it.
well,
It's a research finding.
No, and I think it's legitimate. I mean, I think it's legitimate. I mean, that's partly why the campaign both had this very emotional strawberry video and why the graphics say, you know, 40% of the food waste in the country is wasted, right? It uses 55 gallons of water to waste an egg, right? Because people need to feel connected emotionally, but they also kind of need to, like, get it, right? We also see things like people are very cost conscious when they purchase things. Like in the research that we've done, and maybe Laura, you found this too, you know, people will like drive across town to get the 2-for-1 deal, to use the coupons to get the thing that's twice as large for half as much money. You know, they're like very aware of food, the cost of it when they buy it, but often quite oblivious to the value when they throw it out, right? And so we would see people like looking at the date labels, and they just look at the date and they just pitch it, right? And there's no regard to, you know, opening up, taking a look at it, smelling it. There's no regard to the value of what they're throwing in the trash. So even basic statistics like the average family of 4 spends $1,500 a year on food is a new thing for most people, right? So it really is a matter of coming, you know, raising the awareness of some of those very, very basic things so that people get it. And then really thinking about, okay, how do you help them do better? Right, you know, and I think your point is valid. Like, you don't want to, you know, kind of train people to plan for a whole week, when in fact, so often what happens is people buy a lot of food and then they eat out a couple times, and things get busy, and they go to the neighbors, or they go out for dinner or whatever. And we found, particularly like with millennials, they often kind of over-anticipate in sort of an anticipatory, aspirational way how much they're going to cook. Right? And they're like, we want a lot of variety, I want to experiment, I saw this cool recipe, I want to try it. But then their lives get busy, right? And people eat out instead and other things happen. So it really is, I think, also about helping people be realistic with what they can do. You know, and making it really practical, very flexible, and very easy so that people can incorporate some of those practices at home and feel like they're being successful.
That's great. Laura, do you want to maybe just share a little bit of where your research is currently being used?
Yeah, so I was actually, so my research is still in its beginning stages, but I want to highlight one thing that I think is super important from some work I did with Oregon DEQ, talking with people in households. And I think it's really that people do feel constrained by the choices they can make in a grocery store, or even with their cookware. And I think it's really important to identify the retailers and the upstream and the entire food system as having huge impacts and decisions that are made by household members. And I think one thing, for example, is we often talk about people that live alone, or maybe 2-people households, and going to the store and things are packaged in a way that it's too large, or even like a head of broccoli for one person can be a lot. But it's not just that. We also showed that people, it's the size of the dishes that we used to cook prompt us to make more. And so it's also making these things so people, if they want to make a casserole that isn't for 8 people and they don't want to eat it for the entire week, that I have a personal casserole dish that is this big, but I'm a weirdo. I like went out and tried to find that when I lived alone because it kept bothering me. So I think just making these options more available, making people feel like they can make the choices and that they aren't completely constrained by, you know, where they shop or where they live, I think is really important.
Great.
What's the
Do you want to
Where
just
are we?
you started to talk about this at the very end, and I think
Yeah.
it's worth just letting you delve a little bit further. But you know where you're seeing some of the research right now being used, and
I really value this conference, as I think we all do. And one of the things that really strikes me is how quickly things are changing and how aggressively they're changing. So working in, and food product development is having a really weird moment now. Anyway, Nielsen said there's going to be more innovation, more new products launched in the next 5 years as have been in the last 50 years, because everyone's just, they're struggling, and the media is sort of exploding. And so, you know, in my world in food product development, you know, you see someone on food TV will do a recipe, and you know, if you're working in retail, you'll know who was on food TV last night, because people come in asking for, like, you know, boned out porchetta or something that like they saw on TV, right? So that's already happening, right? And then you layer on top of it a coordinated ad campaign from NRDC and Ad Council, right? And all of our combined efforts. And consumers, I think we're past, I think 2 years ago when I was here, it was about awareness, right? It was about building awareness, getting consumers on board, changing the world. We're all in this together. And I think now they're saying, yep, okay, so tell me, so what do I buy? Where's the solution? What is it? I saw the strawberry video. Where's my half size so I don't waste, right? We're talking to consumers about things like bread. You know, why is bread 16 or 18 slices in the middle of low carb fever, right? Where is your 2 or 4 slice loaf? It doesn't exist. It's absolutely not on the market, right? So we're pushing consumers in one direction, but manufacturers are not on board with us. And so, you know, we're kind of poorly, I think, trying to link those things together, but I think we could be a lot more strategic. So what's exciting to me is a lot of our work started with startups who were, you know, people like Misfit, and they had an idea and a vision, and no one was really, you know, sort of paying attention. And they did it, and they were successful. And now the big players are, you know, the multinationals have innovation teams that are saying, oh, what about food waste? Could we do something here in this space? So it's working, but I think we need to be ready to deal with that success, right?
JoAnne, you mentioned that some of these efforts have been happening in the UK already in terms of the retail component, in terms of educating people and getting people actually to think about the purchases that they're making, and sort of owning the space a little bit more. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that, and maybe if anyone else has any other specific examples of retailers or even elsewhere in the manufacturing chain where people are actually stepping up and taking that role as an educator, and what sort of responses you're seeing.
Yeah. Great, okay. I mean, this is such an interesting topic. I feel in a certain way I have this certain kind of like UK envy, because, you know, the UK is about 10 years ahead of us, right? And I think we all know about some of the things that have happened with RAP UK and very comprehensive efforts on consumer education and engagement, and the business community being quite tuned in a very kind of inventive sort of way. And so you've seen in the UK retailers like Tesco and their, you know, competitors, but coming together and really working with their consumers to waste less food, right? And educating people on how to make use of the food that they're buying. And it reflects, I think, a very interesting mentality, which for them, I think is really, how do we position ourselves not only trying to be successful financially by selling as much as we can, but being successful by being a trusted resource for our consumers. so that our shoppers feel like they're maximizing their food dollar and they're getting a good value because they're taking that food home that they purchased from us, and they're enjoying it and they're using it and it's not going to waste. And so that has really led some of those retailers in the UK to position themselves as consumer educators, right? And it's a very interesting perspective, and I hope that we'll see more of that in the United States. And I think that mentality also speaks a little bit to what you were getting at, right? I mean, it's not only what people can do themselves, but kind of the broader environment that they're in. And so you're seeing some retailers in the United States shifting away from things like buy one, get one free, right? Which encourages people to take home stuff that they probably wouldn't have paid for, right? Offering more sizes and what people can purchase, offering, even if you're buying a large quantity, that the chicken breasts are in individually wrapped, pieces so that you can just defrost what you need, right? So there are things like that where the retail community and the processors that support them really can help consumers be able to be more effective in reducing food waste at home.
I wonder if you're noticing anything along those lines and how that plays out actually when it comes to putting things away in your kitchen. Like, are there things labeled on a package of chicken to say, hey, defrost half of this and put the rest in your freezer, for example? Or are there other things that people are sort of reading or picking up from any of these companies that is helping them shape their decisions right now?
Yeah, it seems like people are really into tips, and I will say that one of the things, one of the things that they really pointed out is information overload. But when they're in the grocery store, that's when they seem to most be open to the tips. Because I'd ask them questions like, are you interested in trying to reduce your food waste? How would you like to get the information? And people generally are like, no, email, the internet, there's too much. We want the grocery stores to teach us, maybe put something near the cilantro. I heard somebody yell that out as like a wasted thing. That's like, hey, this is the best way to store your cilantro. Make it a little mini greenhouse and put it in your refrigerator. This is how you can do it. And I think that would be really great. And that's what people seem to want is they're focusing on food and other parts of life, and the waste is a really tiny portion of what they have capacity to get information on. So when they're in the grocery store, when they're in places where they're already thinking about it, we need to be able to take advantage of those times and really get them the information then. And I think that's really, people are into it. We just got to get it to them in a good way.
It's interesting to me because your argument about, which I agree with, is there's so much burden on the consumer and it's really a social. It's the same. It's 20 years later than the sort of Mary Nestle nutrition argument, which is the same, right? It's all about consumer choice and people should be free to eat whatever they want, but we just have to. They should have those tips and hacks, and it's like, okay, yeah, to some extent, you make decisions and right, but you also shouldn't have to hack the system to avoid total food waste. You should also be in a system where it's okay if something on the menu isn't available because that's better than having extra everything all the time, right? And so it's probably somewhere in the middle, which is something that's very un-American, right? So we go to the middle ground.
So I end up writing about things like grocery disruption a lot, which my editors are always like, really? But I'm like, it's happening, it's real time. And I wondered, when I think about, the way the sort of grocery industry is being disrupted, so to speak, I'm thinking of things like, Amazon buying Whole Foods, and now offering, Prime delivery in 2 hours to a lot more cities and offering their Prime deals to everywhere in the country as of tomorrow. Other things that are, sort of mucking up the works for a lot of groceries are things like meal kits, things like, Instacart, things like food delivery and Grubhub and the popularity and the fact that you can get food at any time, any place, at the press of a button. And I wonder, I think there's a lot of criticism of those industries in part because there's a lot of, transportation that's being used to convey all those foods as opposed to, making one big trip. But are there benefits to it? Are you in fact buying less food because you're just making the purchases you would make through an app versus those sort of, seeing the end caps and buying all that extra stuff and coming home with more in your shopping cart than you would normally do if you're just filling up a cart online? And are there ways to think about incorporating the conversation about food waste into those disruptive technologies and other ways that can be beneficial to consumers in the end?
Yeah,
Okay, next question.
I mean, groceries are interesting because it's just it's horrible for everyone, right? So you have this giant refrigerated box that you have to drive through. You have perishable inventory. You have slim margins on the retailer side. You have a burdensome, unappealing. No one really likes, I think. I don't know. You would know. People don't like to grocery shop. A lot of them.
Some do.
Some do. And it just, I think it's pretty clear it doesn't work, and I think it's not clear, meal kits were one, sort of proposed solution. I think maybe they were a threat, but I don't think they're the answer, right? And so I think the answer has not emerged yet, but I think there's pretty broad awareness that this is not a growing segment and a really successful model. If you look at retail, I mean, no one's buying stuff like they're buying groceries. It's just we haven't quite figured out the workaround for that, right?
So the other thing I would want to mention, because this is something that came out in my interviews, is people do talk about delivery, both of grocery items, but also of full meals. And I think it sort of depends whether it reduces waste based on the people. Because for some people, again, they would note that they planned their entire week out, but then they were stressed out, and so they could immediately go and get that food. They were tired, they had a long week. So I think, again, those things actually could, I propose, have a benefit of reducing household food waste in some contexts, but then not in others. So I don't think it's necessarily a straightforward answer. Because if it's offsetting food that has already been purchased,
Yeah. I mean, I haven't seen any data yet that shows whether people who are buying from the grocery store waste any more or less than people who are purchasing meal kits and having them delivered. I mean, I think it's an interesting line of inquiry. I think it's important, if an analysis like that was to be done, to look at all the packaging and the transportation emissions and the resources that go into getting that food to people, in addition to looking at how much they're wasting, to really look at the environmental impact in a holistic way.
You said, we were talking a little bit earlier about transparency, and I couldn't help but think about how in the grocery store, we're very accustomed to seeing glass in front of our fridges, right? Like, we look in the fridge and we pick out our frozen waffles or our frozen peas, and we look through the glass to find the items that we're looking for, but then when we get home, we put everything behind a opaque, fridge door, and we can't see the food. And that's how the poor strawberries end up in the garbage, right? Because they're not in the back. I mean, when we think about transparency, I mean, obviously it would be great if we could start selling more clear glass front fridges, right? Just so people can actually see their food every day and not be questioning, what do I have in there? But I mean, are there in the absence of that, are there other things that we can do to get people to kind of keep their food front of mind?
Yeah.
And are there tools or techniques that people can use that have the effect of being a glass front fridge? And I'm wondering, just from a tech side, or just from, how do we keep people, actually keeping track of what they have? Because it's one of the biggest challenges.
Well, one of the pieces of research that Laura helped us with when NRDC did a lot of sort of baseline assessments of food going to waste in people's homes, and we also did some on the commercial side, was in homes the very large proportion of waste that is actually leftovers, right? A lot of leftovers. People making too much of something. It was just too much. They didn't like it. The kids didn't like it. Whatever it was. People brought home leftovers from restaurants, and them being often in opaque containers, right? So you can't see it, and then it gets pushed further and further back, right? That's a very interesting finding to me. It's not terribly surprising, but I think in part it's a cultural thing. I mean, it's part that you can't see what's in the container, so it's easy to forget, and we keep purchasing more food, and so what you have gets pushed further back. But it's also a cultural thing. I grew up in a family of 5 kids. Like, my brothers ate everything that was left over. I mean, there were, right? And I hear a lot of, people say that that's true. Like, in their own homes as kids, food did not go to waste. And times have really shifted. But part of it is, I think, people just kind of being aware, right? Glass containers certainly help. Rotating your refrigerator helps. My sister does this thing in her freezer. She keeps a list of the top 6 things she actually needs to use out of her freezer. And she just sticks a Post-it note to her fridge, so that when it's dinner time, she's like, okay, tomorrow I'm going to pull this out of the fridge and thaw it and use it, right? And that's very simple. It does take a little bit of thinking, a little bit of planning, but some of those things are pretty simple and free.
Yeah, the one thing I would add on refrigerators, because I think refrigerators are fascinating, I see them as like huge social actors in this whole food waste story, is people often are in two camps. There are people who feel a lot of anxiety about not having a full refrigerator. I spoke with this one woman and she called it shopping for Armageddon, and she would shop to fill her refrigerator. So the moment there was a space, it would be filled, even if she wasn't going to eat it immediately. And I asked her, did you have food access issues growing up, any of these things? And she didn't. It was just the way that her household worked. And her cupboards were also filled. It was the idea of choice. And then there's the group of people who feel very anxious when their refrigerator is too full, which is the boat I'm in. But for the people who want a full refrigerator, it often isn't the amount of food that is in the refrigerator, but it is the percentage of the refrigerator that they perceive as full. So one of the things I was also thinking is if we the back of the refrigerator is its own place. If we sort of made a shallower refrigerator and so it seemed like it was just as full, but it was actually had less food. This is something that I've been thinking about, like how can we have people not have the anxiety, because they still want the full refrigerator, but how can we maybe fit less food in it so they still feel happy, but they're wasting less? So from a technology perspective, I think that could also be an interesting research thing to look at.
So they do have smart refrigerators now.
They do.
Samsung
They do.
has one, right? So I think we will see more activity in that area. One of the things we're pushing with this James Beard curriculum with culinary students, but I think it will work, and instructors, but I think it'll work for consumers, is there's a lot of talk about mindful eating, right? Being strategic about what you put in your mouth. And mindful cooking is something we're really pushing in two ways. One is most people, and I'm interested to hear if this resonates with Laura's work, most people decide what they want to eat for dinner and then sort of take inventory of whether they have it or whether they need to buy it. So I feel like chicken tonight, how am I going to procure that, right? And this includes chefs and menu planning and so on. They very rarely start the other way and say, what do I have to work with and how can I make a meal? And Dana writes about that. Others. This is not a new idea, but it's something that needs to get some traction, I think. And then the other part is the sort of full product utilization, right? Asking yourself before it hits the compost, what can be done with this? What can be done with cauliflower leaves? What can be done with broccoli stems? What can be done with carrot peels? Why did I just peel that carrot, right? Constantly as sort of a mantra, like what can I do with this? And it actually works, at least with students. I'm interested, again, in the home version.
Great. I want to make sure we have enough time for questions. So
I think we can go at least another 5 minutes or so. I know for a fact other sessions are going over as usual.
okay. Great. So with that in mind, I'm a journalist, so I'm a word nerd, but we talked a lot about semantics and words and the different sort of ways in which we have couched things in order to make people more amenable to thinking about food waste differently. A couple words that came up in our conversation we had as we were prepping this session was edible. And I know that that's actually in the process right now of being sort of defined by the state of California. And I wanted to talk with you a little bit about that work and just about, what are some of the things that, in terms of the key words that you think we need to really better define for the public in order to understand and address these types of issues. And edible, we can start at edible, but if there's others you'd like to sort of introduce, I'd love to hear them.
I wouldn't define the word edible for the public.
What's that?
I wouldn't go there.
Really?
Yeah, I wouldn't.
Can you elaborate on why?
Well, okay, so I think everybody knows WRI has this fantastic, very highly developed protocol around food loss and waste, and they define edible, and it has to do with the parts of things, eggshells not being edible and so forth, which is very helpful. California, in some of their legislation, has used a somewhat different term that's more about what can be recovered or rescued and redirected for human consumption. That's a different thing than does the rotisserie chicken have bones, right? So I think there's kind of this ongoing debate about, which term is being utilized, how do we be clear about what that means? I do see sometimes a fair amount of confusion over if food is still safe, can it be rescued and rechanneled to people in need? Because even if it's safe and you're talking about food that is wholesome, getting it to people in need involves a whole lot of other things, right? That are fairly complicated and logistical and whatnot. And so that's kind of another layer of the analysis, and I think sometimes those things do get conflated and it gets a little confused. NRDC did a lot of research that we released last October with support from the Rockefeller Foundation, looking at both how much waste was being generated, that Laura helped us with, and then a parallel body of looking at how much food that was being discarded in various business sectors could potentially be rescued for people in need. And they were actually built on completely different databases, different models, different methodologies, because they're quite different things. So those distinctions are really important. And that research called Food Matters is available on our website if you're interested.
Yeah, I think what JoAnne said is absolutely true. There's edibility. Is it edible at the time of disposal, or was it intended for human consumption sort of edible? But I also think it's really important that I feel like sometimes we talk about edibility as if it's this agreed upon concept, and it's really a culturally defined concept that is, there's many different definitions within the United States, and edibility really isn't, it's not an innate characteristic of a material or of any food item. And so I think it's really important that we point all this out. And I'm not trying to pick on USDA, but I think we need to sort of really go into what is considered edible. For instance, in their national nutrient database, they consider 25% of potatoes refuse. They call it parings and trimmings, which I find to be high, personally. I eat all of a potato. But so we need to really understand what we're talking about when we mean edibility. Whether is an apple core edible or not, that's one that people often have very strong opinions about. So, one way or the other. So I think it is really important, and vocabulary is very important. We all see this, the word food waste, or the term food waste, right? Half the time I don't know if I'm talking to a person, whether we're talking about the same thing. Are we talking about the edible portion only? Are we including the inedible parts? Are we talking about only landfills? Are we talking about all disposal destinations? And I think we as a community need to do a better job at sort of getting on the same page about that stuff.
I'll just share maybe an anecdote. So I'm trying to really push to call everything food. It's food. Maybe we want to prevent waste. Maybe it's recoverable, but it's all food, and we're going to do with it what we can. So there's a whole curriculum that everyone in culinary school does about as purchased and edible portion. So you buy a head of broccoli, what's the edible portion, which a lot of people think of like the florets, and then what's the as purchased weight, right, which would include all the trim. And so something I'm doing pretty much in all my classes now is I'm doing things like making jams from strawberry tops and pineapple peels and things like that to really challenge their notion of edible portion. Like it's all edible portion, right, unless it's going to kill you. It's just a matter of what can you possibly do with it, right? And thinking differently, and then looking at how that changes your cost scenarios, right? And so that's another example of, I think, hopefully at the next one of these, we'll see a lot more of this kind of stuff shifting from professional kitchens to consumers.
Great. I think at this point I'd love to open it up to questions if you guys have them. So your hand shot up in the back there, so. Yeah.
Thank you.
I want to show it to everybody I know.
Please do. Oh, sure. If you go to savethefood.com, it's there on the homepage. Yep, absolutely. Thank you.
In the red sweater there.
Have any of you of the panelists done research with K through 12 students as the future food shoppers, possibly food wasters, to see where they are? You've done research with some of the other consumer groups, but just wondered if you had touched on that.
I have not.
I'm not.
I have not
Yeah, our campaign was aimed at moms and millennials, so we didn't look at kids. One thing that we are working on actually is a food waste reduction plan for the Minneapolis public schools. I'm based in Minneapolis, and I know Oakland, I don't know if Nancy Deming is in the room, has done some great work There's Nancy, talk to her. Oakland has really, I think, led the way in figuring out how to reduce food waste in school environments, and they have a terrific game plan in place, and they do a lot of donation and other sorts of things. You know, we focused on adults, but I think this issue of how do we teach kids to value their food is so fundamental. I mean, a lot of those habits form very early in life. And it's something that I think we as a community need to really think about how to do in a more deliberate fashion. You know, the Peter Rabbit video gets at a little bit of that, but it's, you know, it's scratching the surface, right? It's a start.
Yeah, and I can remember being, you know, an adolescent getting very excited about the recycling movement, right? You know, and I think you could easily see that adapted to food waste now in children. So, good point. Other hands in the blue. Yeah.
So I'm a graduate student at the Tufts University Friedman School, and I'm working with an economist on a series of projects working on the consumer side of the food waste problem. And one of the things that we've been struggling with is we want to be able to quantify the work that we're putting together, and when you're talking about consumer behavior, it's inherently difficult to measure in any way that you can look at very econometrically. So I'm wondering how you guys grappled with that problem.
Yeah, well, direct measurement is very difficult, and I have used with the NRDC kitchen diaries as one of the main way to get quantitative information, and then we did bin digs to sort of see, hey, is what they're writing in the kitchen diary sort of the same? And we got the same results as, or the same-ish underreporting from kitchen diaries as UK RAP and a couple of other people, and it's about a 40% underreporting rate for kitchen diaries, which is huge. So, and that's just of an underreporting of the material that's put at the curbside. That doesn't count for like any underreporting from drain disposal or anything like that. We weren't able to capture that. But I think that, at least from the household perspective, just getting any accurate numbers, people, I think Ronnie, in your paper, you mentioned that, you know, people underreport how much they waste or estimate of how much they waste, and then overreport the sort of behaviors that they undertake in order to try to reduce wasted food. Is that correct? Yeah, and I think that's something that's really hard. People don't want to waste food. People feel guilty. They know it's not the socially acceptable choice. And so I think part of it is they want to seem better than they are. And also in the NRDC study, even though we asked people to act normally, we got tons of comments at the end when we did our second survey, like, oh, this is so great, I wasted way less this week. And we were like, no. Like, that wasn't the point. So I think it's also just that tracking also in itself, knowing they're being watched, you know, changes their behavior.
Yeah. Well, they're underreporting what they're eating too, so they
I know Andrew Shackman at LeanPath has really tried to get at this issue of, you know, once you introduce that software, is the baseline they're gathering even lower than it actually really was? And like, how do you deal with that, right? Right, as soon as, you know, people know that they're being looked at, yeah, it's going to change. So it is a challenge for sure.
So one of the things I didn't get into is we're doing some neuromarketing with our biomedical engineering and marketing together to do brain imaging using FNIR. So the long story short is you used to have to go to an MRI machine to do any brain imaging, which is really not the best time to talk about, like, taste this granola bar and tell me what you think and would you buy it. But they have a system called FNIRS, which is functional neuroimaging. It's portable. You can eat, you can talk, you can act normal while your brain is being mapped. And so you can actually, people lie, as consumer researchers know, and they especially lie when someone with a clipboard and who knows something about something like food is that nutrition or food waste is asking them. So when you can map their brain activity, what you're really measuring is conflict. So if someone's like, yes, I would buy that, and there's no conflict, they're pretty much not lying. And if there's all sorts of humming and hawing, they're probably not 100% sold. And that together combined with their verbal data can give you more interesting stuff. So we can talk more.
I think, unfortunately, we're probably going to have to wrap it up at this point, but I'm sure our panelists would be happy to answer any questions on their own if you have them. Thank you so much for your great questions and for all the panelists for their fabulous research and sharing. Thank you.
Thank you, Janelle, for your great questions.
Yes, yes, that was fun.
Good.